It begins, as many things did back then, with clouds, thick ones, low and moody, like they've taken offence at a poorly translated Latin sermon and now intend to sulk over the entire countryside until further notice. This quiet little patch of the cold isn't meant for everyone, but if you found your way in, maybe you were supposed to. Before we wade in too deeply, you're welcome to like the video and subscribe, if the quiet suits you. And if it's not too much trouble, tell me where you're watching from, and when. There's something oddly comforting about knowing we're all tucked into our own corners of the world, listening to the same slow rain. Now pull the blanket close, let the room dim, maybe crack the window just a bit, let the night in, but not too much. The frost can wait, the fire's low, but steady. You've made it through another day, and now we rest, together. Somewhere between the 14th and 17th centuries, before umbrellas, zippers, or the concept of moisture-wicking fabric, rain wasn't just weather, it was a schedule. It was Tuesday and Wednesday, and, if you were particularly unlucky, most of Lent. In a timber-framed cottage that leans slightly from age and unresolved structural questions, the day begins to slow, not because anyone chose to be idle, but because the rain insisted. The fire pouted in the hearth, the roof leaked with the kind of dignified rhythm only centuries of thatch can manage, and outside the chickens looked as though they'd been personally betrayed by the sky. There were no playlists, no cozy jazz compilations with lo-fi beats, just the soft, deliberate dripping of water through ancient wood, and the occasional creak of a damp beam deciding whether or not today was its final contribution to architecture. Rainy days were spent indoors, not by preference, but by wool-based necessity. Wool, as it turns out, holds water like a grudge. Lear. The boots took days to dry, and until then every step was a cold, wet reminder of your fashion choices and how you only owned one pair. Still, people managed. They mended clothes, slowly, and with a familiar kind of despair. Not the existential kind, but the sort of sorrow reserved for realizing you've worn holes in your second-best shirt, which was also your only shirt. Children squabbled quietly in the corners. Grandparents stared out the window with plague-hardened apathy. Their bodies were present, their minds were somewhere drier. Even the nobles, sealed in their vast, echoing stone houses, weren't spared. They passed the time having their hair greased into shapes that defied both gravity and God. If vanity was a sin, medieval nobility was on a direct pilgrimage to the confessional. And so the hours passed, slowly, damply, with the quiet surrender of a world that had yet to invent the scroll bar, the tumble dryer, or the uniquely modern horror of seeing your own reflection in a black phone screen at 2 a.m. Here the rain wasn't background noise, it was the whole story. It begins before the birds do. A low grumble from the sky, not quite thunder, more like a disgruntled sigh from above, as if the clouds have just remembered something they meant to complain about. In the thatched cottage near the edge of the village, the roof responds with familiar reluctance. A slow drip into a wooden bowl announces that the storm is not only coming, but already seated and unpacking its things. Somewhere, a beam groans in solidarity. Outside, the morning is painted in wet greys and squelching browns. The fields glisten with mild despair, the kind of damp that doesn't just soak your cloak, but seems to crawl into your knees, settle in, and demand rent. Chickens huddle beneath the overhang, with expressions that suggest betrayal. They are wet, they are offended, and they are determined to let the world know about it, silently, of course, but with excellent posture. Within the house the day creaks awake, not with urgency. That's not how rainy days work. It's more of a reluctant shifting of weight, a pulling up of threadbare sleeves, a quick glance at the corner where last night's wet shoes sit, still damp, still unrepentant. This is not the kind of morning where anything exciting happens. There are no battles, no feasts, no galloping messengers bringing news of war or love or scandal, just the kind of soft, soaking rain that turns roads into suggestions and plans into theories. Rain in the 14th to 17th centuries wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a character, a recurring one. It shaped routines, ruined markets, and occasionally removed entire bridges from existence. If weather apps had existed, they would have simply said yes under the category for rain. No need for details. The cottage, built from wattle, daub, and a collective agreement to ignore the smell, begins to stir. In the corner, a pot of yesterday's water sits with quiet judgment. The hearth-jar glows faintly from a half-hearted fire that decided sometime around midnight that warmth was optional. A cat, no one's really, curls tighter on a bench near the embers, dry by law, damp by attitude. There is no rush, there never is on days like this. No medieval equivalent of scrolling Instagram. No rainy day self-care routine involving face masks and herbal tea. Just the gradual realization that the floor is colder than expected and that getting up will require both feet and courage. Outside, the rain is not content with merely falling. It performs, dripping off the eaves with a smug rhythm, tapping the window pane like it's trying to be let in, fully aware that it already owns the place. It doesn't pour so much as assert itself. The damp creeps in slowly, through gaps in walls, through seams in wool, through the shared ancestral memory that nothing today will quite dry, not entirely, not honestly. There is a rhythm to rainy days in this century, a quiet surrender. Tasks shift indoors, voices lower. The world shrinks to the size of a single, smoky room. Outside, the landscape blurs softly under the drizzle. Fields disappear at the edges. Time slows. It is not a special day, but it is, in its own quiet way, complete. A day built for wool socks that never quite dry, for sitting, for mending, for sighing. A day that begins in wet silence and plans, heroically, to stay that way. And the rain, having made its entrance with moody flare, settles in for the long haul. The fire had been lit with hope. It now burns with mild regret. It crackles softly, the way a fire does when it knows it's being watched, but has no intention of performing. A few flickers of flame lean lazily against the soot-blackened stone. Not warm, exactly, just warmer than the alternative. A pair of wool socks, damp, misshapen, and deeply offended, hang limply on a wooden rack by the hearth. They look like they've just returned from war and lost. Nearby, several pairs of shoes form a solemn line, each one in varying stages of sogginess. The oldest pair has given up entirely, and now resembles something that once belonged to a drowned knight. The newer ones only appear hopeful from a distance. In the medieval world, warmth was not a given. It was earned, coaxed, and maintained through sheer willpower and a strong tolerance for smoke. The hearth was not just the heart of the home, it was also its therapist, toaster, drying rack, and sometimes the only functioning member of the household with ambition. Slippers, such as they were, consisted of whatever fabric hadn't been used elsewhere. Often wool, occasionally leather, and always several decades past their prime. Lined with fur, if one was lucky, and if the previous wearer wasn't still using it. These were not slippers that glided across polished floors with elegance. These were slippers that shuffled, scurried, clung to feet like slightly damp promises. A tunic is hung too close to the fire. It begins to steam faintly, giving off the unmistakable aroma of boiled ambition and wet sheep. No one comments, not allowed anyway. That would require energy, and the room is currently on a strict ration. The cottage walls, wattle, daub, and deeply emotional plaster absorb the heat at a glacial pace. The windows fog slightly, though not enough to obscure the mournful expressions of the chickens outside. Rain drums gently on the roof, and as if keeping score of how many dry things remain inside. The answer, increasingly, is none. In modern terms, this would be the part of the day when one might light a scented candle labelled forest dampness or medieval hearth vibes. Back then, the only scent available was actual medieval hearth, which smelled of smoke, unwashed wool, and something faintly herbal that no one could ever quite identify. Despite the gloom, there is a kind of comfort in the ritual, the placing of socks on sticks, the turning of tunics, the careful balancing act between drying something and accidentally setting it on fire. These were the small dramas of domestic life, quiet, smoky, and eternally moist. No one in this household owns a second pair of socks. That would be considered extravagant, almost scandalous. Extra socks belong to nobles, monks, and that one widow down the lane who may or may not have a secret lover with a wool surplus. Everyone else simply rotated between wet and dryish. The fire, never in a hurry, burns on. It is watched with the same level of reverence usually reserved for saints or miracle bread. Its glow softens the hard corners of the room. It casts dancing shadows on the beams above, where centuries of smoke have settled like tired memories. A spoon clinks in a pot somewhere in the background. The cat shifts slightly. The socks remain exactly as they are, damp, mildly steaming and nowhere near dry. Outside, the rain continues without apology. Inside, the war on damp socks quietly endures. By mid-morning, the socks are no drier. The fire gives off the faint warmth of a small apology. The rain continues its steady percussion on the thatch above, undeterred and deeply committed to its role as the day's background soundtrack. There's a natural shift that happens in the house now. A gentle migration from warming limbs to tending to tasks best suited for this kind of slow, wet day. It's time to mend things, preferably without making them worse. In one dim corner of the room sits a basket. It contains the household's textiles that have either suffered from time, use, or some quiet act of rebellion. A sleeve torn by a protruding nail, a linen kerchief that's been through one too many medieval laundry days, which is to say, 3, and a pair of hose that gave up sometime last winter and now function more as a suggestion than a garment. These are not the glamorous sewing projects of a noblewoman's chamber, no delicate embroidery of saints and swans here. Just the slow, necessary stitching of things that used to be whole and would like to be again, if only someone would ask them nicely. The needle is threaded with effort and silent judgment. The thread knots immediately, as if reminding everyone that sewing, like life in the 1400s, is not meant to be easy. Undoing the knot is a meditative process, complete with sighs, pricks to the finger, and the quiet hum of a person trying not to swear in front of the cat. Stitch by stitch, the fabric is pulled together, not neatly, but earnestly. The seam wobbles slightly, much like the floor beneath the stool. Perfection isn't the goal, function is. If it covers what it's supposed to, and doesn't unravel before the next market day, then it is considered a success. Standards are low, but heartfelt. In the medieval world, clothes were not discarded lightly. There were no trends, no seasonal collections, no peasant core aesthetic, trending on TikTok, just garments worn until they frayed, then mended until the fabric turned to memory. Even nobles, for all their pomp and gold-threaded nonsense, kept garments in circulation far longer than modern fashion would allow. Though to be fair, some of them were so stiff with embroidery and religious symbolism they may have simply been unwearable from the start. If vanity was a sin, some of these outfits were outright blasphemy. Back in the cottage, the sewing continues. The rhythm is gentle, a soft tug, a loop, a pull. The kind of task that quiets the mind without requiring it to disappear entirely. Outside, the rain begins to fall in longer, slower patterns, as if it, too, is tired of being dramatic. Occasionally, a thread breaks. This is accepted. Medieval thread has the tensile strength of a wet spiderweb and the attitude of a drunk squirrel. A new piece is cut, the needle rethreaded, and the process resumes. By midday the sleeve is repaired. The hose is no less tragic, but now at least symmetrical in its defeat. The kerchief, patchworked in 3 different shades of once white, is folded neatly and placed back in the basket, ready to unravel again in 2 weeks' time. There is no applause, no sense of triumph, just a subtle shift in the air, the kind of satisfaction that comes from fixing what can be fixed, however temporarily. The fire flickers. The cat opens one eye and then closes it again. The rain, ever faithful, continues its sermon on the roof, and the needle is tucked away until tomorrow. Water is boiled, then boiled again. For what reason, no one can exactly say, only that it feels important. Like performing a ceremony one doesn't fully understand, but fears what might happen if skipped. The pot on the fire has not been washed in recent memory. It is simply the pot. To ask where it came from would be like questioning the origin of fog or why geese scream. It simply is. And into this vessel goes water, grain, and hope, mostly water. The porridge simmers slowly. It does not bubble with joy. It sighs, a kind of weary blurp, a thick grey mixture of oats or possibly barley, or possibly something swept off the floor and declared edible by necessity. Its colour is indistinct, its flavour even more so. Eating it is less about pleasure and more about not fainting mid-task. In modern terms, it is the original meal prep. Herbs are added, not for flavour, but because someone's great-grandmother once claimed they could cure melancholy, ward off nightmares, or restore a wan complexion. No one remembers which herbs exactly, but as long as something green goes in the pot, the ritual is preserved. Some of the herbs are dried, some are suspiciously furry, but once boiled, everything becomes equally mysterious. The fire pops softly, half listening. A spoon is left in the pot, and gradually begins to resemble a medieval relic, its handle darkened with effort and porridge regret. Outside, the sky stays the same colour as the meal, dull, blank, and softly damp. In this era, boiling thing serves many purposes. It softens beans, it scalds linens, it purifies drinking water in theory, though many believe that illness comes from foul vapours and weak morals, not contaminated wells. If one catches a fever, the solution is often to boil yet another substance, wave it near the afflicted, and hope. Even clothing is occasionally boiled, though the fabric rarely thanks anyone for it. Lye and ash are stirred into steaming tubs to cleanse garments of both dirt and sin, though it usually just shortens the lifespan of the cloth and makes everything smell faintly like burned tree. Despite the effort, medieval cleanliness is more about intent than outcome. A person may boil a tunic and still reek of onions and wet wool, and that's considered respectable. If one smells faintly herbal, it's either a compliment or a sign of impending death, depending on which herb it is. As the porridge thickens into something resembling medieval concrete, it is stirred less frequently. Stirring suggests the potential for change. This pot has long passed that stage. It now enters its final form, edible-ish. Elsewhere in the room, other things are being boiled. A waxy root in a copper pot, a bone-white broth meant to strengthen the lungs or, failing that, impress the neighbours. There is a general belief that hot things cleanse, mend and restore, though usually they just burn fingers and fog windows. In modern terms, this would be the equivalent of a juice cleanse performed by candlelight, with ingredients sourced from the garden, the roadside, and possibly the ceiling. It feels virtuous, and that's enough. By the time the porridge is ladled out, it has cooled just enough to no longer be legally classified as lava. It slides into wooden bowls where it sits in quiet beige defiance. No one thanks it, no one needs to, it has done its job. Outside, the rain gathers strength again, pattering harder against the thatch. The fire leans into its work. The house smells of steam. damp cloth and ambition boiled down to its plainest form. Everything has been softened, and now everything can continue. The porridge bowls sit drying, or at least absorbing their contents into the wood like aging secrets. Outside, the rain continues its soft tyranny, falling with just enough insistence to make escape feel heroic and inadvisable. Inside, the air has thickened into its midday texture, part steam, part smoke, part unspoken judgment from the hearth. There is no great event scheduled, no feast, no market, no festival involving turnips and poor decisions, just a floor and a broom. The floor, to be clear, is not truly a floor in the modern sense. It is earth, compacted, swept, and occasionally beaten with flat stones in an act of domestic optimism. No tiles, no varnish, just hardened dirt, its surface textured with history, hoofprints, and the fading heel of last year's guest. The broom is little more than a bundle of twigs lashed to a stick. Its bristles are enthusiastic but confused, some sticking out sideways, others quietly giving up. It does not glide, it scrapes. The sound is somewhere between a sigh and a warning. Sweeping begins, not to clean, but to assert one's humanity. To say, in essence, I know this is pointless, but I do it anyway, which, incidentally, is the core philosophy of most medieval household tasks. Crumbs from yesterday's bread, and possibly last week's, shuffle begrudgingly under the bench. A few ancient oat hulls re-emerge near the hearth, having survived multiple meals and at least one sermon. They are veterans now, survivors. They've earned their place. Dust is gently coaxed toward the threshold, only to turn back like a moody teenager. It clings to the air, the hem of garments, the folds of fabric meant for better days. In a house made of wood and wool and old air, dust is the permanent roommate, the one who never pays rent but knows where everything is. Under the table, always a haven for small rebellions, lie splinters of bone, a spoon no one claim. Ed, and a single pea so shriveled it resembles a philosopher in quiet protest. These things remain untouched. Sweeping here is performative. One clears the middle of the room. The edges belong to time. In places of nobility, floors are sometimes strewn with rushes, fresh herbs and grasses meant to mask the smell of indoor humanity. Unfortunately, once walked upon, they turn into a sodden mat of decay, trapping more filth than they disguise. Still, the tradition continues. After all, if it's good enough for the manor, surely the peasantry must aspire to rotting flora too. Modern comparisons would include vacuuming a rug that was made entirely of compost, or wiping counters in a house built from old fruit. The illusion of cleanliness remains shiny, comforting, and fundamentally false. Still, the act of sweeping persists, a rhythm, a ritual. The body moves, the broom scratches, the floor protests, and for a moment control feels possible, even if the ground will never truly change. Above, a spider, perhaps the household's true owner, regards the process with the kind of calm authority only creatures with 8 legs and no rent can possess. The web is dusted gently, not to remove it, but to preserve its integrity. Spiders, after all, eat the things that fly, and flying things are unwelcome. By the time sweeping ends, the floor looks exactly as it did before, perhaps slightly more annoyed. A few dust motes hover in the air like half-forgotten thoughts. The broom is returned to its corner, where it leans like an exhausted elder, waiting to be summoned again for another futile round. Outside, the rain has changed pitch, now less of a patter, more of a soft chant. The day hums forward, one small, thankless task at a time. And beneath it all, the floor remains, quiet, resigned, unchanged. The floor has been swept, or at least symbolically threatened with tidiness. The broom now rests against the wall, splinters slightly more splintered, having once again failed to change the fundamental nature of dirt. And so the house settles into its next act, waiting out the weather. Outside, the rain delivers its usual performance, steady, unfazed, deeply committed to the role. It drips with conviction, creaks through the beams, and sighs against the window panes as if it, too, is mildly inconvenienced by existence. The roof naturally has its opinions. It leaks in 3 distinct places, each with a name, a rhythm, a presence. The far corner drips in rapid succession, like a nervous foot tapping under a medieval sermon. The second leaks in slow, deliberate drops, spaced like the ticking of an untrustworthy clock. The third, that one's unpredictable, a surprise artist. It drips only when you've just looked away. A bucket is placed beneath one of them. It misses entirely, but no one moves it. In a house like this, close enough is the reigning philosophy. The bucket itself is a veteran of many rainy seasons. It's warped, dented, and possibly a little sentient. It served water, held scraps, stored regret, and now it hopes to catch a leak. It doesn't, but the effort is appreciated, if not by the floor, then at least by the ceiling, which continues leaking with the same smug consistency as a medieval barber reciting medical theories involving leeches and divine punishment. From beneath a woolen shawl, someone watches the ceiling with the detached interest usually reserved for watching paint dry, or in this case, plaster flake. The slow erosion of the upper world. In centuries past, people looked up and imagined gods. Here, they look up and imagine how many more rainy seasons the roof has left before collapsing in protest. Roofs in medieval homes were not so much protective barriers as they were suggestions. Constructed from thatch, they were home to spiders, mice, sometimes birds, and often entire metaphors. They leaked, they sagged, they occasionally caught fire in dry summers, and yet no one questioned their presence, much like certain fashion trends today. Speaking of fashion, the average medieval hood was less about style and more about survival. Leaks were not isolated events. They were environmental features. One learned which corners of the room to avoid, which beams dripped, which spots required footwear indoors. Not because it was muddy, but because no one could remember what had last fallen from the ceiling. But the house endures. The sounds become a kind of music, not the joyful kind, more like the score to a long contemplative play where nothing happens and yet everything feels inevitable. The kind of play that wins awards for its atmosphere and loses viewers to sleep in the second act. Outside, puddles grow like silent arguments. The garden is slowly giving up its shape, retreating into mush. Chickens have taken refuge beneath the eaves, their feet slightly too dignified for mud, their eyes full of judgment. Inside it is warm, barely. The fire sputters in agreement with the rain. The air smells of wet wool and singed bread crust. It is not unpleasant, just medieval. And still the drops fall, the leaks perform, the bucket waits, the house listens. This is not a crisis. This is just another chapter in a life defined by the slow decay of materials and the stubbornness of people pretending it's fine. The rain has its complaints, so does the ceiling, but here, tucked between the sigh of beams and the shuffle of slippers across straw, it all feels strangely settled. The world drips, and you drift, and you. The rain lingers, as if unsure whether it has truly made its point. The roof continues its quiet dripping, now almost companionable. The air is thick with moisture, smoke, and the subtle aroma of damp wool, nature's reminder that everything you own is absorbent. Inside, the day shifts to its next task, cleaning the body, or at least the idea of one. Hygiene, as understood in the medieval household, was more performance art than science. It did not aim for transformation, merely for optical illusion. You wouldn't be clean, but you could briefly appear less unclean. And on rainy days, when buckets are already filled with nature's lukewarm offering, it almost feels like the universe is encouraging this illusion. A basin is brought forth, a shallow wooden bowl with the weary look of something that's seen things it would rather forget. A cloth is fetched. It is not clean, but it is different from the one used to mop the floor, which is, technically, progress. The ritual begins. Sleeves are rolled, water is scooped, the face is dabbed hesitantly, as though confronting it for the first time. A few strategic swipes behind the ears, across the neck, down the forearms. It is more of a ceremonial dampening than a wash. If cleanliness is next to godliness, then this is at best a respectful nod from across the village. Soap exists, technically. Usually a homemade block of mystery fat and ash with the scent of questionable choices. It is used sparingly, not out of frugality, but out of fear. The last time someone used it generously, a rash followed, and a short-lived local superstition involving demons and dairy. But vanity, that's eternal. Even here, among smoke and straw, people cling to appearances with admirable, if delusional, resolve. Hair is combed, or picked through with a wooden fork. Teeth are rubbed with cloth. Breath is prayed over. And anyone with a mirror, usually a cloudy shard of polished metal, will spend an extra moment angling it just right, hoping to see their best self in the blur. Medieval skincare, incidentally, included such luxuries as vinegar rinses, rose water if you were rich, and mud if you weren't. Pimples were interpreted as signs from God, or from sin, or from cheese. No one really agreed, but everyone judged. It's important to remember that in a time where plumbing was sorcery and towels were heirlooms, simply smelling less offensive than your neighbour was a social win. Bathing was communal, infrequent, and occasionally scandalous. A full soak was rare, usually reserved for saints, royalty, or those about to die. Today, though, there will be no bath, only the basin. A single bowl of water attempting to negotiate with an entire human body. It loses, of course, but it tries. Fingernails are cleaned with small sticks. Feet are dried over the fire, like forgotten vegetables. Hair, wet from both rain and ambition, is wrapped in cloth and ignored until drier days. Still, there's a certain dignity to it all. A quiet, determined attempt to not be utterly revolting. A fight against filth waged with lukewarm rainwater and hope. And when it's over, when the cloth is wrung, the basin emptied into the mud, the shawl pulled tighter, there is a strange sense of accomplishment, not cleanliness, but less grime, less itch, less shame, and sometimes that's enough. The fire crackles in vague approval. The rain, still talking to the roof, seems to quiet just slightly. The house smells a little more human, and outside the puddles grow, unimpressed. By now, the rain has become part of the furniture. Not an event, but a mood. A damp, persistent soundtrack that even the birds have stopped reacting to, except for the chickens. The chickens are not impressed. They stand in a semicircle of moral judgment, feathers puffed, necks tucked, eyes narrowed. If poultry could file complaints, there would be parchment involved. Their coop leaks, their grain is soggy, and their personal space has been invaded by a rogue puddle that appears to have ambitions. In the hierarchy of discomfort, these hens place themselves well above royalty. The goat, not to be outdone, stares blankly at the grey sky and chews with the slow, pointed malice of someone who remembers sunshine and holds you personally responsible for its absence. It has moved exactly 2 inches in the last hour, only to shift its disapproval from the fence post to the door. No one is enjoying this weather, especially not the human with the bucket. the one whose job is to refill the animals' water troughs, despite the fact that water is literally everywhere. But of course, rainwater is untrustworthy. It collects in odd places, grows interesting algae, and sometimes brings frogs. So the rules persist. The buckets must be filled, the troughs must be emptied and cleaned, and the goat must apparently glare. The ground is a soup of straw and footprints. Each step is a negotiation. One foot sinks, the other slips. Balance is an illusion. Mud is destiny. The chickens follow with passive-aggressive clucks, like supervisors on break, watching you fail upward. Somewhere between the well and the goat's pen, the handle of the bucket starts to creak, a tiny medieval reminder that everything you rely on is one use away from becoming a story about disaster. You carry on anyway because the goat is watching, and shame is a powerful motivator. At the trough, the ritual repeats. Dump tea, stale water. Scrub with whatever implement is nearest, usually a twig, occasionally a shirt hem. Refill, slowly, carefully, trying not to splash your already soaked shoes. And then step back as the goat approaches with the swagger of someone who's tasted better. Farm animals in the Middle Ages weren't pets. They were co-workers with attitudes. The chickens provide eggs, unless they're feeling political. The goat offers milk, but only if the stars align and it hasn't been offended by your tone. Pigs are clever, cows are patient, but chickens hold grudges. And all of them, on rainy days, behave like unpaid actors in a tragedy they didn't audition for. You finish your rounds soaked to the knees, smelling faintly of barn and humility. The chickens have retreated beneath the coop, still muttering. The goat has returned to its post, judging a distant squirrel. The trough is full, the job is done, sort of, because in a few hours it will need doing again. The rain will refill the wrong places, the mud will deepen, the hens will find something new to protest, and the goat, well, the goat will continue its lifelong campaign of disappointed chewing. This is the rhythm of medieval life, not glamorous, not poetic, but real, and slightly damp. Animals need care, even when the heavens are leaking, especially then. Back indoors, you peel off your soaked shawl and hang it near the fire. It drips in quiet defiance. Your boots squelch like they're trying to speak. The house smells like wet wool and survival. Outside, the rain hasn't let up. The chickens resume their glaring. Somewhere in the distance, a duck looks smug. The rain continues with its usual authority, speaking in slow drips against the window ledge. By now it's less a phenomenon and more a companion, unwelcome but familiar, the kind you wouldn't invite but wouldn't ask to leave either. Inside, the hearth crackles, and it is time for bread. It is not warm, it is not soft, it is bread in the medieval sense. Dense, dry, and oddly confident about itself. It sits on the table like a statement, not a meal. You do not so much eat it as confront it, like a memoir written in crust. The loaf has likely been around for a few days, or possibly weeks. Bread, after all, was not expected to entertain. It was expected to endure. It survives the rain. It survives rodents. It survives teeth. It arrives on the table in chunks, not slices. Slicing implies elegance. These are more like geological formations, torn from the loaf with hands or, in optimistic households, a knife that doubles as a tool for everything from carving wood to defending chickens. You take a piece. It is firm, which is to say it could chip stoneware. Chewing becomes a meditative exercise. Slow, deliberate, with a rhythm that invites contemplation. Each bite echoes faintly in your head like distant bells. The taste? Neutral, sometimes slightly sour, occasionally revealing hidden surprises like bits of oat, traces of ash, or the delicate crunch of what may have once been flour. Salt is a luxury, butter is a dream. jelly is a heresy. Still, there's something soothing about it. Bread is grounding. It has a kind of solemn dignity, like a monk who has taken a vow of flavourlessness. It's not trying to impress you. It knows it's essential. And in a world where food security often means not currently starving, that counts for a lot. Medieval bread came in many forms, most of them unyielding. There were coarse loaves for peasants, finely sifted ones for the upper classes, and wrenches, thick slabs used as edible plates, though most people gave up halfway and fed them to dogs, pigs, or guests you didn't like. In some homes, bread was reused. Yes, reused. Yesterday's loaf could become today's stew thickener and tomorrow's spoon. At a certain point, it ceased being food and began its journey into philosophy. Crumbs were everywhere. They migrated through clothing, lived in bedding, and quietly nested in the corners of rooms like shy house spirits. You never cleaned them. You accepted them. They were part of the medieval circle of life. Bake, break, drop, forget. And then, of course, there's the jaw. After 15 minutes of chewing, one begins to reflect not only on sustenance but on mortality, meaning, and the structural integrity of one's molars. Dental care was medieval, and while many people lived long lives with few teeth, it didn't make the process more enjoyable. Gums worked overtime. Bread did not apologize. It's a strange comfort, this ritual of mealtime resistance. Food that doesn't coddle, but commands. Eat or be eaten. Munch until wisdom is achieved. Modern gym culture talks about functional strength, but nothing builds a jawline like 12th century rye. And still, you go back for another piece. Not because it's delicious, but because it's there, because it's familiar, because it fills the stomach and hushes the doubts. And because, in a world of unpredictable weather, temperamental livestock, and suspicious pottage, bread is, ironically, the stable thing. By the fire, someone shifts, a log hisses, a crumb falls and disappears into the straw floor, beginning its next quiet journey. The bread remains on the table, silent, hard, vaguely triumphant, and the rain, ever constant, approves. After bread, and before the evening begins hinting at its approach, there is a pause in the middle of the day, soft, slow, and endorsed by every elder who ever lived. Not by decree or rule, but by a universal, unspoken law. Afternoons are for stillness. It begins gradually. The chores don't stop, not exactly. They just fade. The bucket is half filled. The firewood stack is nearly done. Someone was mending a tunic, but the needle has gone quiet in their lap, and across the room a cat, possibly the true master of the household, has sprawled in a patch of warm light like a puddle of judgmental fur. Grandparents take the lead in this ritual. One is slouched in a chair of creaking wood and fraying cushions, hands folded across their middle like a satisfied monk. The other pretends to be just resting the eyes, which is medieval for unconscious. It is not a deep sleep. It is the kind of slumber reserved for saints and tax collectors, light, timeless, and entirely resistant to interruption. In this moment, time stops pretending to be important. Outside, the rain maintains its gentle campaign against the roof, tapping a rhythm that encourages surrender. Inside, the air is heavy with the scent of peat smoke, damp wool, and a faint smell of cabbage that refuses to explain itself. The cat, of course, is deeply asleep. Cats in the Middle Ages were not pampered pets. They were workers, expected to patrol the house for mice, and occasionally blamed for plague when theology ran out of ideas. But in moments like this, even cats took a stand for comfort. They stretched, yawned like emperors, and commandeered the warmest spot without apology. Elsewhere in the cottage, younger members of the household resist sleep with the quiet intensity of people who fear they'll miss something. They won't. The most exciting thing likely to happen is a log collapsing in the fire, but still they peer out windows, fidget with tasks, pretend to organize tools. Napping, of course, had no hashtags. It was not romanticized with ambient music or marketed as self-care. It was simply necessary. The body gave out, the mind drifted. You sat still long enough, and the world pressed a finger to your forehead and said, enough. It's ironic, in a way. In a world obsessed with sin and productivity, the most sacred part of the day was when nothing happened. A medieval siesta endorsed not by law or scripture, but by the slow certainty of tired bones. You weren't lazy, you were preserving strength. And in a place where food was uncertain and time was borrowed, that counted for a lot. No clocks tick, no schedules hum, only the slow breath of a house at rest, accompanied by the damp shuffle of a sleeping grandfather and the occasional indifferent twitch of a feline ear. Midday rest wasn't just a habit, it was a philosophy. In a time when life demanded constant labor, this was a moment of rebellion, to do nothing with intention, no scrolls to check, no performances to post, just stillness wrapped in wool and soot. Outside, the rain continues in its reliable whisper. The world does not end, the goats do not riot, the chickens may protest, but they always do. Eventually, someone stirs, not quickly, the sort of stirring that suggests they might lie back down just to make sure the nap is fully finished. The cat stretches, rearranges itself by exactly 6 inches, and returns to its important work. There are chores to return to, but not yet. For now the world is paused, and in the ancient rhythm of dirt, weather, and weary bodies, that pause is sacred. Even the fire crackles softly, as if trying not to wake anyone. The fire has settled into a low, rhythmic whisper. Its glow dances faintly on stone and skin, painting everything in warm, flickering sepia. Outside, the rain continues with its usual sense of inevitability, a steady percussion that has long since become background noise, like the clink of a spoon or the slow creak of a tired floorboard. In the corner of the room, someone has opened a book. Not a sleek paperback, not a breezy romance novel for the beach, but a thick, damp volume bound in skin and anxiety, its pages curling like old parchment trying to remember how to be a sheep. The cover groans slightly as it opens, not unlike the readers themselves. The smell is immediate, aged vellum, wood smoke, and a faint hint of theological panic. The kind of scent that makes you question whether knowledge is supposed to smell medicinal. Reading in this time is not a common activity. It is sacred, slow, and mostly decorative. Books are rare, expensive, and treated with the reverence usually reserved for relics, noble lineage, or cured meats. This particular tome contains scripture, commentary, and the enthusiastic doodles of some long-dead monk who appears to have invented an entire species of imaginary bird. Several pages are stuck together. This is neither alarming nor new. In the medieval world, parchment was made from treated animal skin, and humidity had a way of making it sociable. Separating the sheets requires care, patience, and the kind of concentration usually found in tightrope walkers or medieval dentists. The reader, if we can call them that, stares deeply into the page. Whether comprehension is taking place is another matter. Often, reading in the Middle Ages was more about posture than understanding, like attending a modern art gallery or pretending to enjoy jazz. The goal is not to follow the text, but to be seen near it, to absorb knowledge through sheer prox, imity and squinting. The Latin is dense, the handwriting worse, and the marginalia occasionally wanders into areas best left unexamined. But the act of reading, real or staged, is important. It shows discipline, piety. It makes you look ever so slightly more educated than the man chewing on bark outside. The light is poor, of course. Candles were precious, and natural daylight has long abandoned the interior. You read with the same amount of illumination used to hunt ghosts. Shadows flicker across the page, warping the words, until even the divine truths begin to resemble a grocery list. And yet, this moment has a quiet grace to it, not in the clarity of the text, but in the stillness it demands. Reading, even when poorly lit and dubiously understood, slows the mind. It flattens the world into two dimensions, ink and silence. You don't read to escape, you read to endure. Books in this time often came with chains, not as a metaphor, actual chains. They were locked to shelves like medieval iPads at an airport, because theft wasn't just about profit, it was about stealing someone's only gateway to eternity. You turn a page, it sticks slightly. You unpeel it with reverence, as though separating two stubborn saints. The next section appears to be a sermon about modesty, accompanied by an illustration of a man wearing a tunic so short it defies its own message. Irony, apparently, was not yet canonized. Outside, the rain does not care. It continues as it always does. And inside, the book remains open, not for entertainment, not even for understanding, but for rhythm, a quiet act of defiance against noise, distraction, and the chaos of livestock. Eventually the book will be closed, not slammed, gently folded, like a secret being tucked away. The reader will stretch, the fire will flicker, the cat, still curled in the same exact spot since breakfast, will twitch one ear, and the will return to silence, as if the book had never been opened at all. The light has faded into something soft and apologetic. Outside, the rain has taken on its evening rhythm, a slow drizzle, like the sky is second-guessing its decisions. Indoors, the fire slouches low in the hearth, more glow than flame, barely enough to see by, but just enough to convince everyone not to complain. It is time for supper. That term, of course, is generous. Supper suggests something warm, intentional, maybe even edible. What arrives instead is more of an offering, an act of endurance disguised as a meal. A wooden bowl is passed down the table, its contents ambiguous but steaming. Boiled something, possibly vegetable, possibly not. Turnips are involved. Turnips are always involved. There's also a chunk of meat, or what was once meat, whose identity has long since dissolved under hours of boiling and whatever passed for seasoning in the 14th century, which is to say, none. The Middle Ages were a time before salt was scandalously common, and pepper was a luxury item that could bankrupt a village. Most flavour came from hope, and even that was rationed. Bread appears too, though it has the texture of ambition and the colour of regret. It's dense enough to bruise if dropped and dry enough to double as insulation. Still, it's torn and shared with the solemnity of a religious rite, not because it's delicious, but because there's not much else. Everyone eats in silence, not reverent silence, but that specific brand of weary resignation that happens when both body and soul are too tired to protest. Chewing is slow, eyes are heavy, no one is savouring anything, because there is nothing to savour, just nourishment, or at least the bureaucratic version of it. And yet, in a strange medieval way, this is comfort. The fire's low glow, the waxy flicker of a single candle, the shuffle of a chair leg against the floor. Even the food, dull as it is, carries the warmth of routine. It is unremarkable, it is unpleasant, but it is dependable, and that, in a world of plague, superstition, and mysterious rashes, is a kind of luxury. There is no wine, only ale. Flat, lukewarm, slightly sour ale served in heavy mugs that once belonged to someone whose name has long since worn off. Everyone drinks it anyway. Water is not trusted. Tea is a distant rumour. Coffee doesn't even exist yet, and won't until much later, when the world needs something stronger than pottage to survive mornings. Across the table, someone picks at the edge of a boiled root. Not because they dislike it, everyone dislikes it, but because they're trying to decide whether it's safe to eat the part that's still slightly green. It is not, but they eat it anyway. It's been a long week. The candle sputters slightly, casting flickering shadows on the wall, tall, thin silhouettes that make every person look vaguely haunted, like saints caught halfway through regretting a miracle. The air smells of damp wool and cabbage, with a hint of smoke and defeat. By now, even the cat has declined to beg. It sits by the hearth, eyes half closed, judging everything and everyone, including the pottage. Still, there is a strange peace here, a kind of humble dignity in sharing a meal no one wants. It's the sort of grim solidarity that binds people together, like jury duty or communal hangovers. No one's smiling, no one's talking, but no one's alone. Eventually, the bowls are emptied, or close enough. Crumbs are brushed aside. The candle leans a little lower, and slowly, one by one, the bodies drift from the table, some to their straw beds, some to quiet corners, some to stare at nothing for a while longer. Outside, the rain begins to fade. Inside, the disappointment lingers, but gently, as it always does. Night has officially arrived, not as a dramatic entrance, but more like a slow leak of light into a bottomless well. The supper bowls have been cleared, the fire has grown sluggish, and the last surviving candle has taken on the heavy burden of being the only thing stopping the house from turning into pure shadow. This is not modern darkness. There is no warm refrigerator hum, no hallway nightlight, no phone screen glowing with bad decisions. This is medieval darkness, full-bodied, slow-moving, and deeply judgmental. The kind of dark that seems to know things about you, personal things, embarrassing things, like what your feet actually smell like. The candle, half spent and already leaning with exhaustion, casts long, twitchy shadows across the walls. What was once a familiar corner now looks vaguely like a cloaked figure debating something sinister. The stool, perfectly harmless in daylight, appears to be crouching. The rafters groan gently, as they always do, but in this hour it sounds suspiciously like muttering. There's nothing truly supernatural happening, of course, just the usual creaks and sighs of a house older than several saints. But in the absence of distractions, the medieval brain begins to perform at Olympic levels of paranoia. Every draught is a ghost, every creak is a curse, and every flutter of shadow is probably a sinner come back to haunt their sins. To be fair, this was a culture raised on folklore, not logic. Rational thought hadn't quite become fashionable yet. This was an era where people believed onions cured the plague and that demons could sneak in through your left nostril if you sneezed improperly. So when the walls creaked, no one asked why. They just crossed themselves and tried not to make eye contact with the doorframe. The candle flickers again, casting a stuttering halo of light that manages to make everything worse. The table suddenly seems longer. The ceiling higher. The very air feels stretched out, like the house is quietly expanding when no one's watching. It's not haunted, strictly speaking. It's just very, very old, which is sometimes worse. Up in the loft, someone has drawn their blanket up to the tip of their nose, not out of cold, but out of habit. A medieval blanket was less of a comfort item and more of a rough, smelly barrier between you and whatever spiritual nonsense might be crawling around after dark. Superstition made great insulation. The silence, too, is a bit suspicious. Not the peaceful kind, but the thick, waiting kind. The kind that feels like it's hiding something behind it. Of course, in truth, it's hiding nothing, just damp straw, wooden beams, and a world entirely out of candles. But the mind, deprived of stimulation, does what minds do best, makes things worse. One can imagine what passed for nighttime reassurance in this era, not soft music or gentle sleep podcasts, but the vague memory of a saint's story involving wolves and burning oil. Not ideal bedtime material, but it was all they had. The house exhales again, just the wood settling, just the wind outside changing direction, just the fire giving up. The candle finally gutters, sighs, and dies. Darkness is complete now, not metaphorically, literally, the kind of blackness that makes you forget you have limbs, where the air feels heavier, where the floorboards vanish and everything becomes soft, formless potential, fear, hope, memories, and draft, all blending together. And yet even this has a rhythm, a strange sort of comfort, the known shapes of the unknown, the familiar dread of another ordinary night. Tomorrow will bring chores, aches, and something boiling again. But for now, the shadows rule, and all anyone can do is lie still, close their eyes, and let the house creak its ancient lullaby into the silence. With the candle long extinguished and the fire reduced to a sulking pile of embers, bedtime begins, if one could truly call it that. The transition from day to night is not marked by lavender-scented sheets or 10-step skincare rituals. Here, it begins with the subtle ceremony of donning night clothes, a term used generously to describe whatever isn't soaked or infested. There's no silk or flannel in sight, no coordinated pajama sets, no oversized shirts lovingly borrowed from a partner. No, nightwear in the medieval world is whatever garment clings the least and smells the most like the absence of yesterday's chores. A tunic that escaped goat milking duty, a shift that's been air-dried for at least half a day. If it's dry, it qualifies. Beds are not personal sanctuaries. They are shared like secrets, awkwardly, uncomfortably, and without full consent. In most households, you sleep with someone, often many someones, brothers, cousins, visiting neighbours, and the odd uncle whose contribution to society has been existing nearby. Privacy, like dental care, is more aspirational than practiced. The mattress is a sack of straw with commitment issues, lumpy, pokey, and always shifting, just enough to remind you that even rest requires sacrifice. You don't sink into it, you adapt to it. The straw pokes back, not out of malice, but simply because it was never meant to be furniture. It was meant to feed animals, and the animals are probably jealous. Blankets are worse, heavy when you don't want them to be, damp when you need them dry, and always carrying a faint scent of mildew mixed with historical compromise. They're made of wool so scratchy it could be used as a disciplinary tool in monasteries. A medieval blanket is less about warmth and more about containment, a cloth lid for the human stew, and still, somehow, people try to sleep. The house is quiet, but never silent. One coughs, a floorboard whines, a dog farts with ecclesiastical dignity, the co-sleeper next to you shifts, steals the blanket, then pretends not to notice. A baby hiccups downstairs. A rooster, confused and overly ambitious, tries to summon morning 3 hours too early. Sleep is not guaranteed. It is something you try to sneak up on, carefully, as if it might run away if startled. And even when you find it, sleep is not restful. It's a negotiation. You bargain with the itch in your leg, the snore to your left, and the bitter regret of that second ladle of boiled turnips. Dreams, when they do arrive, are strange little plays, cast with vague characters in implausible settings, often involving saints, devils, and goats that speak with your mother's voice. Freud would have had a field day, but alas, the only interpretation available is from a superstitious cousin who once saw a comet and hasn't been the same since. There's no turning over without consequence. Every shift causes a domino effect of creaks, grumbles, and blanket redistribution. If you're lucky, you might claim a small warm spot, a fleeting moment of comfort stolen from the universe before someone's elbow reclaims it. By now the room is thick with collective resignation. No one says it, of course, but everyone is thinking the same thing. This is not how sleep is supposed to feel. But there's no other option. No guest bedroom, no memory foam, just you, your itchy regrets, and a mattress that seems to subtly hate you. And yet, this is bedtime, routine, raw and oddly human, not romanticized, not improved by candles or prayers, just endured. Eventually your body forgets to protest, your mind lets go of its complaints, and sleep arrives, not with grace, but with the heavy thud of exhaustion. Welcome to medieval rest, where bedtime stories are creaky beams, the lullaby is someone wheezing nearby, and the dream ice, simply to survive until morning. The storm has grown tired of itself. No more theatrical pounding or gusty dramatics, just a steady, rhythmic whisper across the roof, like the sky is breathing softly through a wet cloth. Rainwater slides down crooked thatch and drips gently into forgotten buckets, placed there days ago, now permanent fixtures of the home, like medieval feng shui. The roof, for its part, is holding, mostly. It sighs with the occasional creak, a passive-aggressive reminder that it was made of sod, sticks and hope. That one spot above the hearth still leaks, but only just enough to be philosophical. You could move the bucket again, but that would require standing up, and standing up is for people who haven't already accepted their fate. Inside, the house exhales. The air is warmish, muggy, and carries that unmistakable scent of wet wool, soot, and a hint of regret. Bodies sleep where they landed. The bed is full. The bench is taken. One child has curled around a goat. Someone's arm drapes off the edge of a straw mattress, like a medieval art installation about boundaries. There's a strange peace to it all, even in the discomfort, the kind of peace that only comes from total exhaustion and the deep, almost comical understanding that things could always be worse. It could be hailing. The roof could be gone. The goat could be louder. Outside, the rain plays a quiet rhythm on the earth. Mud thickening, puddles expanding with the unhurried confidence of water, knowing it will always win. The village paths are now small rivers. The latrine pit has entered a troubling new phase of evolution, but none of it matters now. Not in the small hours. Somewhere, an owl hoots its disapproval. A dog dreams of chasing something much faster than itself, and the family continues its valiant effort to sleep on surfaces that were never meant for humans, or any vertebrate, really. Sleep, when it arrives, does so courteously. It has been here before and knows this household is temperamental. It tiptoes in, settles between damp shoulders, and takes up residence just behind the eyes. It doesn't ask for comfort. It simply waits for the mind to stop fidgeting. The rain helps. The drip is annoyingly hypnotic, like a medieval white noise machine. A leak in the thatch mimics a heartbeat. A clink of wood shifting sounds like a lullaby written by gravity and rot. Somehow, this chaos lulls people to sleep better than silence ever could. Silence in a medieval home usually meant something was terribly wrong. The pigs had escaped, the priest had arrived, or the baby had discovered how to crawl toward open flames. Now there's only this, a low murmur of breathing, a soft blanket of warmth shared unequally, and the wet, slow tapping of nature reminding everyone who's in charge. The kind of night where dreams take their time. They meander like the storm. No rush, no meaning, just the strange comfort of images that don't need to make sense. You might dream of something pleasant, a feast perhaps, or a festival where no one is throwing turnips. You might even imagine a bed with a mattress that doesn't audibly crunch when you turn over, though that borders on dangerous optimism. And so the chapter ends not with an event, but with the absence of one. No one wakes, no one complains, no one moves. The storm outside becomes background. The house in all its damp, crowded, uneven glory finally sleeps. Rain may keep falling, but here, under uneven beams and a questionable ceiling, it's welcome. a lullaby from the sky, a reminder that even the heavens sometimes need to cry themselves to sleep, and with that, so do you.